Alarms do not sound like this during a normal shift. I know every alarm in this hospital, every pitch and pattern, because I have worked here for 6 years. But the sound tearing through the corridor right now is not one I have heard before, and that is the first sign that something has gone terribly wrong. My name is Elias Cade. I am a trauma surgeon on Halden Station, a medical outpost built in neutral space, shared by humans and a dozen other species under a treaty that has held for 107 years. I am standing over a patient, my hands inside an open wound, when the lights flicker red and the floor shudders beneath my boots. Report, I say to the ceiling, to the station's calm, artificial voice that always answers within a second. There is no answer. Only silence, and then the alarm again, louder. Nadia Frost, the nurse beside me, freezes with a tray of instruments in her hands. Her eyes move to the window behind me, the one that looks out over open space, and her face changes in a way I will never forget. Elias, she says quietly. Turn around. I turn, and I see them. Warships, not patrol vessels, not the small escort craft that sometimes pass through this sector to remind us the peace is being watched. These are heavy cruisers, painted in the deep gray of the Dravith Imperium, and they are close. Too close. Close enough that their hulls fill the window like a wall of metal blocking out the stars. That is not possible, Nadia whispers. This is a hospital. It is protected. Every treaty says so. I want to agree with her. I want to say the words that will make this moment ordinary again, an equipment malfunction, a training drill gone wrong, anything except what my eyes are telling me. But the ship in the center, the largest one, begins to glow along its underside, and I have spent enough years around military patients to recognize what that glow means. Get down, I shout, and I grab Nadia's arm and pull her beneath the operating table, just as the first strike hits the outer hull. The sound is not loud at first. It is a deep pressure, something you feel in your chest before you hear it, and then the wall on the far side of the room simply stops existing. Metal screams. Sparks rain down like a burning waterfall. My patient, a young man from the mining colonies who came in this morning with a broken leg, is thrown from the table, and I crawl toward him through smoke that tastes like burnt copper. Stay with me, I tell him, though I do not know his name, though I have never needed his name before, because until this moment, names were something we exchanged calmly, over paperwork, not screamed through smoke. Stay with me. The lights die completely. Emergency lighting kicks on, dim orange strips along the floor, barely enough to see by. Through the shattered window, I watch a second cruiser align itself with the station, and I understand, with a kind of cold clarity that surgeons develop over years of watching people die, that this is not an accident, and it is not going to stop. This is a medical station, I say out loud, to no one, to everyone. We have no weapons. We have never had weapons. Nadia grips my shoulder. Elias, we need to move the patients, now. She is right, and there is no time to be afraid, because fear is a luxury for later, if there is a later. I lift the young man as gently as I can, feeling him wince, feeling the broken bone shift beneath skin that was whole and simple this morning, and I carry him toward the corridor, toward the emergency shelters that every hospital worker trains for but never expects to use. The corridor is chaos. Doctors and nurses from 6 different species are running in every direction, some carrying patients, some carrying nothing but their own fear, all of us moving through smoke and flickering orange light toward shelters that suddenly feel very far away. A second impact rocks the station, harder than the first, and I am thrown against the wall. The young man slips from my arms, and I catch him just before he hits the floor, my shoulders screaming with the strain, my mind refusing to process the sound of the station groaning around us, like something alive and dying. Dr. Cade. I turn and see Captain Owen Marsh, one of the station's small security detail, running toward me with blood streaming down the side of his face. Security on Halden Station has never carried more than sidearms, because we never needed more than that, because the peace was supposed to protect us. They are firing on the shelters, Owen says, his voice shaking despite his training. I do not know why. I do not know why they are doing this. Where do we go? I ask him, because in this moment, he is the closest thing to command I have. The lower docking bay. There are still 2 shuttles there. We get as many people out as we can. I nod, and together we move, carrying the young man between us, gathering others as we go, a nurse with a broken arm, an elderly woman from a species I do not recognize, a child no older than 8, who is crying without sound because the smoke has taken her voice. Every person we pass becomes part of our small, desperate group, and I stop counting names and start counting heartbeats, because that is the only number that matters now. The lower docking bay is worse than I expected. Half the ceiling has collapsed, and one of the 2 shuttles is buried beneath twisted metal, its hull crushed like paper. The second shuttle sits at an angle, damaged but intact, its boarding ramp still lowered. That is our only way out, Owen says. It will not hold everyone. I look at the group behind me. 12 people, maybe more, joining every second. All of them looking at me as though I have an answer that will make this simple. I do not. I am a surgeon. I fix bodies, not impossible choices. We load the wounded first, I say, because it is the only rule I know how to follow. Then the children. Then everyone else who can fit. Nobody argues. There is no time to argue. We move quickly, carrying, and I feel the station shudder again, weaker this time, as though it is running out of strength to keep standing. A young engineer named Priya Anand, still wearing her maintenance uniform, appears from a side corridor, with 2 more patients on a floating stretcher. The upper levels are gone, she says, breathless. I do not know how many people are left up there. We cannot go back, Owen says quietly, and I hear the guilt in his voice, the same guilt I feel pressing against my ribs. We have to launch, before the hull gives out completely. I count the people already aboard the shuttle. 23. The vessel is rated for 18, it does not matter. I climb aboard last, checking every face, every breath, making sure no one has been left in the smoke behind us. Go, I tell the pilot, a young man whose hands are shaking so hard he can barely reach the controls. Go now. The shuttle lifts unevenly, scraping against the damaged docking bay doors, and for a moment, I am certain we will not clear the station at all. Then we are through, out into open space, and I turn to look back at Halden Station through the small rear window. What I see will stay with me for the rest of my life. The station, our station, the place where humans and a dozen other species worked side by side to save lives regardless of where those lives came from, is breaking apart. Sections drift away from the main structure like pieces of a puzzle no one will ever reassemble. Fires burn in the vacuum, strange and silent, fed by escaping oxygen until it runs out. And beyond it, unmoving, watching, the Dravith cruisers sit in formation, as though they are simply confirming the job is finished. Why? Nadia says beside me, her voice barely a whisper. Why would they attack a hospital? We treated their wounded. Just last month we treated their wounded. I have no answer for her. I only have the sight in front of me, the slow, terrible death of a place that was supposed to be safe, a place that was supposed to prove peace could last. The shuttle's communication panel crackles to life, and a voice speaks in accented standard, cold and formal, broadcasting on every open channel in the system. This is a message to the human colonies, the voice says. Let this serve as a reminder. Your peace exists because we allow it. Do not mistake our patience for weakness. The channel goes silent. No one in the shuttle speaks. I look around at the faces crowded into a space built for far fewer people. The child, who has finally stopped crying, only because she has fallen into shocked silence. The elderly woman clutching a stranger's hand. Owen pressing a cloth against the wound on his face. Priya staring blankly at nothing at all. 107 years of peace, and it ends here, in the wreckage of a place built to heal, with a message meant to remind us of our place. I do not know it yet, but that message was the last mistake the Dravith Imperium will ever make. The shuttle drifts for 6 hours before a rescue beacon finally answers our distress call. 6 hours of silence, broken only by the soft sound of the child crying again, once shock loosened its grip on her, and by Owen's quiet counting of supplies we do not have enough of. Water, bandages, time. When the rescue ship arrives, it is not a warship. It is a civilian transport called the Meridian, registered to a mining company, and its captain, a broad-shouldered woman named Callie Bright, opens her cargo bay without asking a single question about who we are or what happened. She simply looks at our faces and understands. We saw the station burning from 2 systems away, she tells me later, once the wounded have been settled, and the child has finally fallen asleep against Nadia's side. We did not know it was Halden until we picked up your signal. They broadcast a message, I say. After they finished, they said it was a reminder. Callie's jaw tightens. A reminder of what? I do not answer, because I do not fully understand it myself. All I know is that a place built to save lives regardless of species has been reduced to drifting wreckage, and somewhere out there, an Imperial commander believes this was necessary. We reach human territory 2 days later, docking at Ashworth Station, a much larger outpost that serves as the administrative center for this sector of colonized space. I expect grief. I expect officials rushing to console us, doctors rushing to treat the wounded, perhaps a formal statement of outrage sent to whatever council still oversees the peace treaty. What I do not expect is the silence that meets us instead, a silence that feels less like shock and more like restraint. A woman is waiting for us at the docking gate. She introduces herself as Director Grace Whitfield, and something about the way she studies each of us as we disembark makes me feel as though we are not survivors being welcomed home, but witnesses being carefully assessed. Dr. Cade, she says, reading my name from a data slate before I have even given it to her. I need you to come with me, now, if you can manage it. I have patience, I say, gesturing to the line of wounded, still being carried from the Meridian's cargo bay. They will be cared for, I promise you that. But what you saw on Halden Station is the only first-hand account we have, and every hour that passes without a full record makes it harder to act. Act, I repeat. What does that mean? Grace does not answer directly. Instead, she leads me through corridors that grow progressively quieter and more secured, past checkpoints I did not know existed on what I believed was a simple administrative station, until we reach a room with no windows and a single table. Sit, please, she says. Tell me everything, from the moment the alarms began. I tell her. I tell her about the cruisers filling the window, about the strike that tore through the operating room, about carrying patients through smoke toward a shuttle that could not hold everyone who needed it to. I tell her about the message broadcast after the attack, the words about patience and weakness, and when I finish, Grace is quiet for a long moment. There is something you need to understand, she says finally. The Dravith Imperium has already released a public statement about what happened at Halden Station. What statement? She turns the data slate toward me, and I read words that make my hands curl into fists on the table. The statement claims that Halden Station was secretly operating as a research facility for prohibited biological weapons, disguised behind its medical status, and that the Imperium struck it only after confirming this activity through their own intelligence. It claims the destruction was a defensive necessity, carried out with restraint, and that civilian casualties were regrettable, but unavoidable, given the danger the station posed. That is a lie, I say, my voice shaking with an anger I did not know I was capable of. I worked in that station for 6 years. There was no weapons research. There was nothing there but medical bays and recovery wards and children's units. I treated Dravith soldiers there myself, patched up wounds from disputes that had nothing to do with us, because that is what the station was for. I believe you, Grace says quietly. And so does everyone in this building. But belief is not evidence, and the Imperium knows that. They are counting on the fact that no independent authority can verify what actually happened out there, because they made certain nothing was left standing to verify it. Except us, I say. Except the people who were there. Grace leans forward, which is exactly why I needed your account so urgently, Dr. Cade. First-hand testimony from surviving medical staff is the only thing that can counter their narrative, before it becomes accepted as fact across the wider galactic community. Several other species already treat prohibited weapons research as a legitimate justification for military action. If the Imperium's story is allowed to stand unchallenged, they will have successfully turned an unprovoked attack into a defensible act of self-protection. I think of Nadia beside me in the shuttle, of Owen with blood on his face, of Priya carrying patients on a floating stretcher through a corridor that no longer had a ceiling. I think of every name I never learned, every patient left behind because there was no time and no space to save them all. What do you need from me? I ask. A full recorded testimony, under formal oath, admissible before the Interstellar Accord Council. And I need you to be prepared for what comes after, because once this testimony is submitted, it cannot be taken back. It will become part of a much larger process, one that has not been used in over a century. What process? Grace hesitates, and in that hesitation, I sense something enormous, something she is not yet ready to explain fully. There are protocols written into the original peace treaty, protocols most people have forgotten, because they were never expected to be needed again. Protocols that only activate under very specific conditions. An unprovoked attack on a protected civilian medical facility, with confirmed casualties among non-combatant patients and staff, is one of those conditions. And if it activates, then this is no longer a matter for diplomats alone, Dr. Cade. It becomes a matter for the fleet. The word settles over me strangely, because in 107 years, I have never once heard anyone speak of a human fleet as though it were a real and present force, only as a distant memory from a war fought before I was born, a war we lost enough of to accept permanent restrictions on our military capability. We do not have a fleet, I say. Not really. Not one that could challenge the Imperium. Something flickers behind Grace's eyes, something that might be sorrow, or might be resolve, or might be both at once. That is what we have allowed the rest of the galaxy to believe for over a century, she says quietly. It was never entirely true. Before I can ask what she means, the door opens, and a man in a formal uniform enters without knocking, carrying a data slate of his own, with an expression far more urgent than Grace's careful calm. "Director," he says, "the Council has convened an emergency session. They want the testimony submitted within the hour, and there is something else." "What?" Grace asks. 2 more distress signals have come in from the border systems. Small colonies, mostly agricultural, no military value. The Imperium struck them within the last 3 hours, using the same justification. Prohibited research facilities, they are calling them. Every single one. The room goes cold. I understand, in that moment, what I am truly witnessing. Halden Station was not an isolated act of aggression. It was the opening move of something far larger, a coordinated effort to weaken and dismantle human settlements, one manufactured justification at a time, testing how far they could go before anyone pushed back. They are not testing the treaty anymore, I say slowly, the realization settling into my chest like a stone. They are ending it. They have decided the peace is over, and they are simply waiting to see if we notice, before it is too late to respond. Grace stands, her expression hardening into something I have not seen from her until now, something that looks less like a diplomat and more like a soldier preparing for a battle she has trained for her entire career but never expected to fight. "Then we make certain they notice exactly what happens next," she says. "Dr. Cade, I need that testimony recorded in the next 20 minutes. Everything you told me. Every detail. Because in less than an hour, this stops being a diplomatic incident, and it becomes something the Imperium has never truly seen from us before." "What is that?" I ask. She looks at me, and for the first time since I arrived at Ashworth Station, I see something almost like grim relief in her expression, as though a burden she has carried quietly for years is finally being allowed to move. "The truth," she says, "about what 107 years of peace actually built, while everyone else assumed we were simply staying quiet. I do not fully understand what she means. Not yet. But as I sit down to record my testimony, my hands still trembling from smoke and grief, and something that feels dangerously close to rage, I understand this much. The Imperium believed they were reminding a weaker species of its place in the galaxy. They had no idea what they had actually done. My testimony takes 18 minutes to record, though it feels far longer, because reliving the collapse of Halden Station in careful, measured sentences is somehow harder than living through it the first time. When I finish, a young technician gently removes the recording device from the table, and Grace Whitfield thanks me with a quiet nod before leaving the room without another word. I am left alone with a cup of water I do not drink, and a silence I do not know how to fill. I am given quarters near the medical wing, told to rest, told that my role in this has been vital and appreciated. I do not rest. Instead, I sit by the small window of my temporary room and watch ships moving across the dark, wondering how many of them are simply cargo vessels and how many are something else entirely, something that has been hiding in plain sight for longer than I have been alive. It is Owen Marsh who finds me there hours later, still in his torn uniform, a fresh bandage across his temple, where the wound from the attack has finally been treated properly. "You are not sleeping," he says, settling into the chair across from me without asking permission. Neither are you. No, he rubs his eyes. I keep thinking about the message, about patience and weakness. I keep wondering what they think they know about us that makes them so certain we would not respond. Maybe they are right, I say quietly. Maybe we cannot respond. Not really. Grace mentioned a fleet, but everyone knows the treaty stripped our military capacity down to almost nothing. Border patrols, local defense. That is all we have been permitted for over a century. Owen is quiet for a long moment, and something in his silence makes me look at him more closely. You know something? I say. I know rumors, he answers carefully. Things soldiers talk about when they think no one important is listening. Old training facilities and systems that officially do not exist anymore. Engineers pulled from public projects and never seen again. It never made sense to me before, because why would we need any of that if the treaty forbids military expansion? But maybe that was never actually about expansion. Then what was it about? Preparation, he says, just in case someone eventually forgot why the treaty existed in the first place. Before I can respond, a soft chime sounds at the door, and Grace Whitfield enters again, this time accompanied by two other officials I do not recognize, both wearing insignia I have never seen on any uniform before. Dr. Cade, Captain Marsh, Grace says. I apologize for the hour, but events are moving quickly, and I believe you both deserve to understand what happens next, given what you have already sacrificed to get us here. Then explain it, I say, my patience worn thin by exhaustion and grief. Because right now, I feel like everyone around me knows something I do not. Grace sits across from us, folding her hands carefully on the table, and begins in a voice that carries the weight of someone finally allowed to say words she has held back for years. 107 years ago, humanity lost a war it should never have entered, she says. We were young to the wider galaxy then, still learning how vast and dangerous it truly was, and we made the mistake of resisting an expanding empire we did not yet understand the scale of. The Dravith Imperium crushed our early defenses within months. The peace treaty that followed was not a treaty between equals. It was a surrender, dressed in careful language, forcing us to accept strict limits on military development in exchange for being allowed to keep our worlds. I know the history, I say. Everyone learns this in school. You learn the version everyone was permitted to learn, Grace says. What you were not taught is that the treaty contained a single overlooked clause, buried deep in its technical appendices, allowing continued research into defensive technology, so long as it was never demonstrated publicly or deployed offensively. The Imperium assumed this clause was meaningless, a formality with no practical use, because they believed our capacity for advancement had already been broken along with our fleet. They assumed wrong, Owen says slowly, understanding arriving in his voice before it fully arrives in mine. They assumed wrong, Grace confirms. For 107 years, while the galaxy watched us behave exactly as a defeated species should, quiet, cooperative, focused entirely on rebuilding civilian life, we used that single overlooked clause to its absolute limit. Every advancement in propulsion, in materials science, in automated defense systems, in shielding technology, has been developed under that clause, tested only in secrecy, never shown to a single outside observer. We built an entire generation of capability that the rest of the galaxy has never seen, because we understood something the Imperium did not want us to understand. What is that? I ask. That peace enforced through fear is never truly peace, Grace says. It is simply a pause, waiting for the side with less power to either grow strong enough to stand as an equal or be crushed again the moment it becomes convenient. We chose to grow. The room falls silent, except for the low hum of the station around us. I think of Halden Station, of Nadia crying quietly beside me in the shuttle, of the young man whose broken leg I never had the chance to properly heal, because a warship decided his hospital deserved to be destroyed. So what happens now, I ask. You have testimony. You apparently have capability no one expected. What is the actual plan? One of the officials who arrived with Grace, a stern-faced man, introduced simply as Commander Daniel Pike, finally speaks. The attack on Halden Station meets every legal condition required to activate what is formally known as the Doctrine of Last Restraint, a clause embedded in our founding charter after the original war ended. It exists specifically for situations like this one. an unprovoked strike against a protected civilian target, verified through credible first-hand testimony, occurring alongside a demonstrated pattern of aggression against additional settlements. The border colonies, I say, remembering the second official's earlier warning. 4 confirmed strikes as of this morning, Pike confirms grimly. All agricultural, all defenseless, all using the same fabricated justification about prohibited research. The Imperium is not testing our patience anymore, Dr. Cade. They have concluded we no longer matter enough to worry about retaliation. The doctrine of last restraint exists precisely to correct that assumption, decisively and immediately, once the legal threshold for activation has been formally met. And has it been met? Grace looks at me steadily. Your testimony, combined with the border colony reports and independent sensor data recovered from a surviving satellite near Halden Station, met that threshold 2 hours ago. The Council voted unanimously to activate the doctrine within minutes of reviewing the evidence. I feel something shift in my chest, something between relief and terror, because this is no longer an abstract idea discussed quietly in a windowless room. This is happening. This is real. What does activation actually mean? Owen asks. In practical terms, it means every defensive asset humanity has developed under that treaty clause for the past 107 years is being mobilized simultaneously, Pike says. Fleets that have never been publicly acknowledged. Weapons systems tested only in isolated simulations. Personnel trained for decades in facilities that officially do not exist. All of it, activated at once, directed at restoring the security of every human settlement currently under threat, and ensuring the Imperium fully understands the consequences of what they began at Halden Station. I sit back, trying to absorb the scale of what I am being told. For my entire life, I believed humanity to be the cautious, restrained species of the galaxy, capable enough to survive but never truly powerful, always careful never to provoke the empires around us, because we understood our own limitations too well. I am now being told that belief was carefully constructed, deliberately maintained, allowed to persist even among our own people, because the alternative, revealing our true capability prematurely, would have invited exactly the kind of preemptive strike we just endured at Halden Station. You let us believe we were weak, I say quietly, not entirely sure if I am angry or simply overwhelmed. All of us, even the people serving in our own defense forces. We let the entire galaxy believe it, Grace corrects gently. Because the moment even one other empire suspected the truth, the balance we spent a century building would collapse instantly. Secrecy was never about deceiving our own people for its own sake. It was the only shield strong enough to let that century of quiet preparation actually happen. And now the shield is gone, I say. Now the shield is no longer necessary, Pike says, because now, for the first time in 107 years, we are choosing to be seen exactly as we truly are. A new chime sounds, more urgent this time, and Pike checks a device on his wrist before standing abruptly. Director, the first response fleet is ready for deployment authorization. They are requesting final confirmation. Grace stands as well and turns to me with an expression that carries something like gratitude and something like apology. Dr. Cade, I know this is an enormous amount to absorb in a single day, especially after everything you have already survived. But I need to ask one more thing of you. What? I say, bracing myself for whatever comes next. The medical teams accompanying this response fleet will need experienced trauma surgeons, people who understand what real combat casualties look like and how to treat them under extreme pressure. You have that experience now, in the worst way possible. Will you join them? I think of the young man I carried through smoke, of Nadia gripping my arm as our world collapsed around us, of the message broadcast afterward, cold and certain, reminding us of a place in the galaxy we were never truly meant to accept. Yes, I say, without hesitation. I will go. Grace nods once and turns toward the door, Pike already moving ahead of her toward whatever command center is coordinating the largest military mobilization humanity has undertaken in over a century. Before she leaves, she pauses and looks back at me. For what it is worth, Dr. Cade, she says quietly, the Imperium built their entire strategy around the belief that humanity would remain permanently weak, permanently cautious, permanently willing to accept whatever treatment they decided to give us. They were wrong about almost everything else, but there is one thing they misunderstood most of all. What is that? I ask. They mistook our patience for the absence of strength, she says. They are about to learn the difference. She leaves, and Owen and I sit together in the quiet room, the weight of everything we have just learned settling slowly around us, like dust after an explosion. Outside the window, ships continue moving across the dark, and I wonder, for the first time, how many of them have been waiting 100 years for exactly this moment to arrive. The ship I am assigned to is called the Aldergate, a name I have never heard before, belonging to a vessel that officially does not exist in any public registry. Standing in its launch bay for the first time, I understand immediately how wrong my assumptions about human capability have been. The corridors hum with a quiet, controlled energy, and the medical bay alone is larger than the entire surgical wing of Halden Station. Nadia Frost is here as well, assigned alongside me after insisting she would not be left behind, and Priya Anand has joined the engineering deck, her knowledge of station systems suddenly valuable, in ways none of us anticipated. Owen Marsh, still recovering but refusing to remain in a hospital bed, has taken a security post near the medical bay entrance, close enough that I can see him through the open doorway whenever I look up from my work. I still cannot believe this was hidden from us, Nadia says quietly, preparing supplies at the station beside mine. All of it, for our whole lives. I keep thinking about all the people who died believing we had no way to answer, I say. The colonists on those border worlds, the people on Halden Station who never made it to a shuttle. Then let us make sure this is the last time anyone has to die believing that, she says. And there is a steadiness in her voice I did not expect. A steadiness I suspect all of us are borrowing from somewhere deep and unfamiliar, forged in the hours since the attack. The Aldergate moves in formation with a fleet larger than anything I imagined humanity capable of assembling, ships sliding silently out of hidden shipyards in systems the Imperium never bothered to survey closely, because they believed there was nothing worth finding there. Commander Daniel Pike briefs the senior staff before the first engagement, and I am permitted to attend as the ranking medical officer for this deployment. Our first objective is not conquest, Pike says, his voice carrying clearly through the briefing room. It is restoration. We are moving to secure every human settlement currently under threat, beginning with the 4 border colonies struck within the last day. Imperial forces occupying those systems will be given one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. If they do not take it, we will remove them. And Halden Station? Someone asks from the back of the room. What about accountability for that? The commander responsible for that attack has been identified through intercepted Imperial communications, Pike says. Fleet Commander Voss Theron, currently stationed aboard the flagship Ilvanar, 3 systems from our first target. He will answer for what happened there. Personally, I feel something settle in my chest at those words, something between grim satisfaction and quiet unease, because I am a surgeon, trained to preserve life, and even now, even after everything, some part of me struggles with the idea of justice, delivered through force rather than through healing. The first engagement happens quickly, almost anticlimactically after the tension of preparation. Imperial forces occupying the border colony of Marrow's Hollow, alerted to the scale of the approaching human fleet, choose to withdraw rather than engage, retreating through a jump point before a single shot is exchanged. I watch the sensor feed from the medical bay, half expecting casualties to begin arriving, and instead, watch enemy ships simply vanish from the display, one after another, as though the mere sight of what humanity has truly built is enough to end the conflict before it begins. They ran, Nadia says, disbelief coloring her voice. They ran because they finally understand what they are facing, Owen says from the doorway, for the first time in 100 years. Not every engagement ends so quietly. At the colony of Fenwick Reach, Imperial forces choose to stand and fight, and for the first time I treat casualties born from actual combat, rather than the aftermath of a surprise attack. Human soldiers and pilots brought into the medical bay, with injuries I have studied in textbooks, but never treated with my own hands until now. I work alongside Nadia for 11 straight hours, and though the losses are real and painful, they are far fewer than I feared, because the ships protecting us are simply better than anything the Imperium anticipated. Your vitals are stable, I tell a young pilot named Callum Ashby, checking the readout beside his recovery bed. You will need time, but you are going to heal completely. Did we hold the colony? He asks, his voice weak but steady. You held it, I confirm. The Imperium is retreating from the entire sector. He closes his eyes, relief visible even through the exhaustion and pain, and I move to the next patient, carrying with me a small, quiet hope that perhaps this reckoning will cost less than I originally feared. The confrontation with Fleet Commander Vos Theron comes 8 days later, near the Imperial staging point at Corvellan Depth, where the flagship Ilvanar has gathered a defensive formation rather than retreat further. Commander Pike requests I accompany the boarding delegation as a medical witness, given my first-hand account of the attack on Halden Station, and though I am uncertain of my role in what feels like a purely military matter, I agree without hesitation. The Ilvanar's bridge is colder than I expected, both in temperature and atmosphere, and Vos Theron himself is smaller than the voice in my memory suggested, though his presence carries an authority that fills the room regardless of his size. He studies our delegation with an expression that shifts slowly from confidence to something closer to disbelief, as Pike lays out the full scope of the human response, sector by sector, fleet by fleet. This is not possible, Theron says finally, his translated voice carrying genuine confusion. Our intelligence confirmed your military capacity remained fixed at treaty limits. There was no indication of this scale of development, none. Because you were never meant to see it, Pike replies evenly. Until now. Theron's gaze shifts to me, perhaps sensing that I am not a soldier, that I carry myself differently from the others in the delegation. You, he says. You were on the station. I was, I say, my voice steadier than I expect it to be. I treated your soldiers there, Commander, more than once. Wounds from border disputes that had nothing to do with humanity at all. We never asked where the injuries came from before helping. That is what the station existed for. Something flickers across Theron's face, an emotion I cannot fully name, perhaps regret, perhaps simple recalculation of a decision he can no longer undo. The order came from higher command, he says quietly. A demonstration was requested, proof that your species remained appropriately contained. I was told the facility held no true medical significance, that its destruction would carry minimal consequence. 214 people were on that station when you attacked it, I say, the number arriving in my memory with painful precision, gathered from casualty reports I read only days ago. 61 of them did not survive. Among them were children receiving treatment for conditions that had nothing to do with any war, any dispute, any politics at all. They were simply patients, simply people who trusted that place to keep them safe. Theron does not respond immediately, and in his silence, I see something I did not expect to find in an enemy commander, a genuine confrontation with the weight of what he ordered, perhaps for the first time since the attack occurred. What do you require of me? He asks finally, addressing Pike rather than me, though his eyes remain heavy with the conversation we just had. Full withdrawal from every occupied human system, Pike states. Formal acknowledgement before the Interstellar Accord Council that the justification issued for the Halden Station attack was fabricated, and your personal surrender to face judgment for war crimes committed against protected civilian targets. Theron is quiet for a long moment, studying the delegation before him, perhaps weighing the reality of a fleet he can no longer hope to defeat against the personal cost of what surrender will mean for him. You could have simply destroyed us, he says finally. Your fleet clearly holds that capability now. Why extend these terms instead? Pike's answer comes without hesitation, carrying a weight I suspect has been carefully prepared for exactly this moment. Because we are not interested in becoming the thing that attacked Halden Station, he says. We are interested in ending this the way it should have ended a century ago, through strength paired with restraint, not through destruction for its own sake. Your surrender ensures no further civilians die in this conflict. Your refusal ensures the opposite. Theron looks toward the viewport, toward the formation of human ships surrounding his own diminished fleet, ships that only weeks ago the entire galaxy believed did not exist in any meaningful capacity. I accept your terms, he says finally, quietly. Withdrawal will begin immediately. The surrender that follows unfolds across the following days, with a speed that surprises even the senior officers coordinating it. Word spreads quickly through Imperial ranks and beyond, through neighboring systems and allied territories, of what happened at Corvellan Depth, of the fleet no one believed humanity capable of building, of a species that endured a century of quiet restraint only to answer overwhelming aggression with overwhelming, disciplined strength. I returned to the Aldergates Medical Bay in the following days to find fewer casualties arriving with each passing hour, the fighting across the sector slowing as Imperial forces withdraw from system after system rather than risk further confrontation. Nadia works beside me in a quiet that feels different from the exhausted silence of our first days aboard, something closer to relief settling gradually into the space between us. "Do you think it is truly over?" she asks one evening, cleaning instruments in the dim light of the recovery ward. "I think it is over for now," I say honestly. "I do not know what comes after this. I do not think anyone truly does." Through the viewport beside her station, the stars stretch on exactly as they always have, indifferent to everything that has changed beneath them. And somewhere among those stars, a galaxy that once assumed humanity would remain permanently small, is beginning, slowly and carefully, to understand exactly how wrong that assumption always was. 3 months pass before I set foot on a hospital floor again, and when I finally do, it is not Halden Station, because Halden Station no longer exists except as coordinates marking a memorial and a debris field slowly being cleared by salvage crews. Instead, I am assigned to a new facility, built in the same region of space, carrying a name chosen by the survivors themselves. We call it Restoration Station, and though the walls are different, the purpose remains exactly the same as it always was. Nadia works beside me here as well, and Owen has taken a permanent security posting within the station, though his role now includes something that never existed at Halden. Armed escort vessels patrol the surrounding space at a respectful distance, a visible reminder that the facility beneath their protection will never again be mistaken for an undefended target. "It feels strange," Nadia says one morning, watching one of the patrol ships pass slowly across the viewport. "Having them there, it almost feels like it contradicts what this place is supposed to represent." "I understand what you mean," I say. "But I do not think it contradicts anything. I think it completes it. A hospital should never need armed protection to remain safe. But until the rest of the galaxy fully accepts that, I would rather see those ships out there than relive what happened the last time we assumed peace alone would be enough." She considers this for a long moment before nodding slowly, and I understand that she is working through the same complicated feelings I have carried since returning to medicine, the uncomfortable balance between the healer I have always been and the witness I became the day everything changed. The galaxy beyond our small station has shifted in ways still being measured and understood. The Dravith Imperium, weakened by the loss of Corvellan depth and the collapse of confidence among their allies, has entered a period of internal upheaval, with several sectors declaring independence from Central Command entirely. Vos Theron stood trial before the Interstellar Accord Council 2 months ago, and though the proceedings were lengthy and complicated by questions of command responsibility, the final judgment confirmed what those of us who survived Halden Station already knew to be true. The attack was unprovoked, unjustified, and deliberately concealed behind fabricated evidence designed to avoid accountability. I did not attend the trial in person. I chose instead to remain here, treating patients, trying to rebuild something resembling normal life, though I understand normal will mean something different for the rest of my career. Grace Whitfield sent word of the verdict personally, a brief message thanking me again for testimony that helped establish the foundation of the entire case, and I read her words with a complicated mixture of relief and exhaustion that I suspect will follow me for a very long time. What has changed most significantly, perhaps, is how other species across the galaxy now regard humanity. Delegations from 3 neighboring systems have requested formal meetings with human representatives in the months since Corvellan depth, some seeking alliance, others simply seeking clarity about a species they suddenly realized they understood far less than they assumed. Commander Pike, now promoted to oversee sector defense coordination, addressed one such delegation recently, and a recording of his statement circulated widely enough that even I, isolated here on Restoration Station, eventually heard it. "For 107 years, humanity chose restraint," Pike said in that recording, his voice calm and measured in a way that carried far more weight than anger ever could. "We chose it, not because we lacked capability, but because we understood the cost of unleashing capability without cause. We still believe that. Nothing about what happened at Halden Station or Corvellan depth changes that belief. What has changed is simple. We will no longer allow anyone to mistake patience for permission. I think about those words often while working through my shifts at Restoration Station, treating patients from a dozen different species just as I always have. Though something in the atmosphere here feels different now, more careful, more respectful, as though everyone passing through these halls understands exactly what was sacrificed to make this place possible. A young woman named Alara Bishop arrives at the station, 6 months after the attack on Halden, seeking treatment for injuries sustained during evacuation efforts on one of the border colonies during the height of the conflict. As I examine her, she asks a question I have heard variations of many times since returning to medicine. "Were you really there?" she asks quietly. "When it happened, at the original station?" "I was," I say, continuing my examination without pausing, because pausing has become harder than simply continuing to work. "What was it like?" she asks, and then quickly adds, "You do not have to answer that." "I am sorry. It is not my place to ask." "It is all right," I say, and find, somewhat to my own surprise, that I mean it. It was the worst day of my life, but it was also the day I learned something about the people I work alongside that I never fully understood before. About what quiet strength can accomplish when it is finally given a reason to act. She considers this for a moment before nodding, and I finish my examination, confirming that her injuries, while significant, will heal completely, with proper care and time. I think, as I often do now, of the young man from Halden Station whose name I never learned, whose broken leg I never had the chance to properly heal, and I wonder whether somewhere out there he survived, whether the shuttle that carried 23 people instead of the 18 it was rated for managed to bring him safely to whatever life awaited him afterward. I do not know the answer, and I suspect I never will, but I carry the memory of him regardless, along with every other patient I could not save that day, because remembering feels like the smallest and most important thing I can still offer them. Priya Anand visits Restoration Station occasionally, now working in fleet engineering rather than station maintenance, her skills valued in ways she never expected when she was simply a young technician trying to keep old systems running. She tells me once, over a quiet meal in the station's small dining hall, about the ships still being built in shipyards across human space, no longer hidden, no longer secret, built openly now, with a purpose that feels less like preparation for another war, and more like insurance against ever again being caught unprepared. "Do you think it will happen again?" she asks me. "Another attack, another test of whether we truly mean what we say now." "I think it might," I answer honestly. "I think the galaxy is large, and memory is short, and someday there may be another power that assumes the same things the Imperium once assumed about us. But I also think that when that day comes, if it comes, they will find a very different answer waiting for them than they expect." "Does that thought comfort you?" she asks, "or frighten you?" I consider the question carefully before answering, because it deserves a careful answer. "Both," I say finally. I think it should always be both. The moment strength stops frightening the person who holds it is the moment that strength becomes dangerous in an entirely new way. She nods slowly, understanding something in my answer that I am still working to fully understand myself, and we finish our meal in a silence that feels less heavy than it once might have, filled instead with the quiet, complicated peace of people who survived something enormous together and are still learning how to carry it forward. Owen finds me later that evening, standing near the same viewport where Nadia and I once watched patrol ships pass slowly through the dark. He carries 2 cups of something warm, offering one to me without a word, and we stand together for a long moment simply watching the stars. "Do you ever think about staying here forever?" he asks eventually. "About just being a surgeon again, the way you were before all of this began?" "Every day," I admit, "but I do not think I can go back to who I was before Halden Station, not entirely. That version of me believed peace was simply the absence of conflict. I understand now that it is something that has to be actively protected, actively maintained, sometimes at a cost none of us wanted to pay." "And do you think it was worth it?" he asks quietly. "Everything that happened, everything we lost." I think of the 61 names carved into the memorial wall near the entrance of Restoration Station. Names I have read so many times I know them without looking anymore. I think of the young man whose leg I never finished healing, of the child who cried without sound as we carried her through smoke, of every patient who never made it to a shuttle that could not have held them regardless. I do not think loss is ever truly worth its cost, I say finally. But I think what came after it matters. I think the difference between a peace built on fear and a peace built on mutual respect is enormous, even if the second kind only became possible because of everything we suffered to reach it. Owen nods slowly, and we stand together in comfortable silence, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the viewport, indifferent as always to everything that has changed beneath them, though perhaps, in some small way, slightly less indifferent to humanity than they once were. Restoration Station continues its work in the months that follow, treating patients from every corner of known space, standing as quiet proof that the values Halden Station once represented were never destroyed, only interrupted, only tested in the most painful way imaginable. The patrol ships remain in the distance, a visible reminder of everything it cost to rebuild what was lost. And though I still sometimes wake in the night remembering smoke and alarms and the sound of a station dying around me, I also remember something else now, something I did not fully understand until I lived through it myself. Peace was never actually broken at Halden Station. It was simply revealed, for the first time in over a century, as something that had always required more than quiet patience to protect. Humanity did not choose war that day. We chose, finally, after 107 years of careful silence, to answer honestly the question the rest of the galaxy had been too afraid to ask. What happens when you push a patient species too far? They finally learned the answer, and I do not believe they will ever forget it again.